welcome back. So, for starters, if you happen to have seen my last video about the readathon stuff and are wondering how that went, it did not went. Yeah, I didn't even get Don Quixote. I started the one from my friend that I got for Christmas, but did not finish it. I didn't even touch the library one that I had gotten from Barnes & Noble that I was like, this is my, longest waiting one. No, so none of that happened. It was a fail as a readathon, honestly. I mean, I did finish some stuff audiobook-wise, and I did start Lord of the Rings, and I was like, oh, this could be my classic instead of Don Quixote, but I didn't finish The Hobbit either, so whatever. In any case, I have something else that I want to talk about, because there was one book that I did at least get through last month that I was like, oh, this could be kind of fun to talk about. So the book that I have is Mystifying Sinister Stories of the Unexplained, and it's a series of short stories by a bunch of different authors. It was put together by Helen Cresswell. I'm not real sure who that is, but that's who organized it. And I have to say that her sense of organization for it leaves me a little disappointed. Mystifying probably applies to the stories, but I don't know that I'd say Sinister does, and I got it, I'm pretty sure, right around Halloween, and I was like, ooh, spooky stories. I mean, I'm just getting to it in January, so to that anyway, but I got it because it was supposed to be like spooky and scary, and I don't think I would qualify most of the stories in here as that. Mystifying probably works because there's some mystical elements to basically all of them, but yeah, I would not say sinister or spooky to most of them. But I did still want to talk about my favorite stories from it, because there were some that I quite enjoyed. So first up, I think I'd like to talk about The Girl Who Kissed the Peach Tree, which is an Italian folktale. I don't know if it's a retelling of it, if it's just based on one or what. But basically it's about this little girl who has a peach tree in her brother's vineyard, I want to say, and they live right next to a volcano, and then the volcano is erupting. Everyone's kissing their trees as a blessing so that the volcano's path won't destroy their trees and stuff. She realizes that she didn't kiss her tree, and she goes back to kiss her tree, and it ends up turning the lava away because there's a spirit that inhabits her tree, and it's because you came back and cared for me, we'll turn the lava away, kind of thing. And it was a really cute little story. Again, I wouldn't say sinister. I guess you could maybe argue the lava aspect is, but the way it's addressed was not very sinister, so at least to me, I wouldn't call it sinister, but I'm glad the story was in here because I don't know where else I would have found it, and it was a good story. The next one I wanted to talk about is probably my favorite one in the piece, in the book, my favorite piece in the book, there we go, which is The Pelican by Anne Piling. So this one, it's a family that's gone on a vacation. They find this weird church that's got all this pelican imagery. They see this wild pelican that comes to this area, that came to this area that it wouldn't be native to, and it's just been living there for a year, surviving well. They've named the pelican Percy by locals and all that. And then the girl's brother in the story starts to drown in a river and is basically saved by the pelican, and I felt like it was a good ending, and I'm glad that they saved the brother, and that, the story played out the way it did. But if you're going to go the sinister route, I think you would need to go the opposite, where the pelican sees the brother drowning and then, aids in the drowning instead of rescuing him from the drowning. So it didn't hit the sinister note for me, but it was a really good story, and I really enjoyed it, so I'm glad that I read it. We also had an Agatha Christie piece in here, The Adventures of Johnny Waverly, which was a really fun little mystery. Honestly, I question the logic of the person who ended up ultimately committing the crime, because how is he going to use the money that he was trying to steal after the circumstances in which he stole it? But it was a fun little piece, and I love reading mysteries like that and being oh, how are they going to solve it now? And getting clued into the little things that you should be noticing through questions that Poirot is asking and stuff, and trying to figure it out yourself. Always very fun. I love Agatha Christie. Again, I wouldn't necessarily call it sinister. It was a kidnapping case, but it didn't have like a spooky tone to it or anything to me. It was just like, this is just a traditional mystery by Agatha Christie, and I wouldn't call her traditionally like sinister in her storytelling, because the good guys always win. You always get that right bit of evidence and the case is solved and it all works out fine in the end. So I wouldn't call it sinister, but I did quite enjoy the piece. And then the next one that I wanted to talk about was The Scythe by Ray Bradbury. This is one that I didn't recognize the title of, but as soon as I started reading it, I was like, oh, I've read this before. I know where this story is going. I remember this one. Because if you don't know me, I'm a big Ray Bradbury fan, and I've read the majority of his work at this point. But The Scythe is one of my favorites. I think it's a very clever story, and this one I actually probably would put as sinister based on the concept that's going around it. The scythe itself is, this family finds the scythe at this farmhouse that they've been like poor and struggling and starving and stuff, and they find this farmhouse that they can live in. There's this field of wheat in the back, and the husband goes out and he uses the scythe to reap the wheat, and then it turns out that reaping the wheat is reaping souls and stuff, and ooh, it's just so spooky because he finds his family's wheat and he doesn't want to cut them down, but then he has to cut them down, and then it drives him crazy. And this one I would definitely count as a sinister story. It's very ooh, but it's very good. It's Ray Bradbury and I love it, and I'm glad it was in this collection because I would actually count it as sinister, and it was a fun one to go back to. Fun in the sense that any story about death in that way could be, I guess, but yeah, it was a good one. I enjoyed it. Let's see, there are a few others in here I'm debating if I want to talk about or not, because they weren't really super favorites. I'll just briefly highlight them, maybe. How about that? So we had A Sea Above the Sky. I loved the concept. The execution was a little dull and boring, and I didn't like that it switched between first and third. The narrator herself in the first person was kind of annoying. It was better just in the third person, I feel like. I didn't like her commentary in the first person. We'll just leave it at that. But the concept was cool. I liked the concept. Again, not really a sinister story. Her aunt just goes off on an adventure in the sky. It's not like spooky, scary, you know? It's just like, I don't know why there's a sea in the sky, but she can go off an adventure in it, and that's pretty cool. So yeah, mystifying, sure. Sinister, not really. Oh, another one that did have some good sinister elements for me, at least overall, maybe not entirely how it ended, was A Vine on a House, where there's like this history of this family that used to live there, and the wife had been missing like a foot, and then she just disappeared, was said to visit family, but just basically disappeared. And then there's this vine that grows on the house. They end up digging up the root of the vine, and it's shaped like the woman, and oh, that gave me chills. I was like, oh, this is so creepy, this is so good. And then it just kind of ended, and I was like, she doesn't really do anything as a vine, she's just there. The house is just calm. It's not really even truly haunted. They claim it's haunted, but no real haunting stuff happens. So I was like, oh, that was quite the letdown. It had such a good build-up, and seeing like the roots and the shape of the person who was missing, great. I love the build-up, and then nothing. And I was just like, okay, I guess that's fine. Then we get to the story that's the reason why I got this book in part 2, because I was also looking for Diana Wynne Jones books at the time, and we have The Master by Diana Wynne Jones in here. I don't know if I've ever read this one before. It says it's in other collections of hers though, so I probably read it a long time ago and forgot about it. It's got the typical quirky Diana to it, but it does kind of have some sinister elements to it. It's one of those sort of frame/dream stories where they experience a thing, and then at the end of the story it comes back and it's like, oh no, I'm actually going to live through the thing, which can be hit and miss, but I think Diana did pretty well with it. And there were some very sinister and spooky things. I kept thinking that Eggs was going to turn out to be the Master's alter ego, and that there was going to be something there, and I was like on the edge of my seat the whole time. So there was good spooky sinister build up in it, and I'm just sad that it ended before you get a true conclusion to the story, although I guess the way she ends it with her realizing that she'd had this dream and it was all happening again and saying, I'm just going to quickly write this down in case I don't come back, kind of is your ending, but I would have liked more of an ending. That's like my issue with that sort of story, I'd probably say, is that you don't get firm conclusions a lot of the time. It's just like, oh, these things are going to happen now. So, anyway, it was overall very good. I do still love Miss Diana Wynne Jones. She's probably still my favorite author, other than maybe Ray Bradbury, because I've read so much of his stuff. But as a kid, Diana Wynne Jones was definitely my favorite, and I've gone back and reread a lot of her stuff. That's what I was doing through a lot of January, actually, was rereading a lot of her stuff. And I do still love her. She's still got really good stuff, so she's still a favorite. Another one that had really good build-up was The Whisperer. It's about a girl who goes to visit her friend's house, and she keeps hearing this voice that's like, please, let me in, and it's this creepy little child's voice. You had this backstory that the friend's father and his brothers had a little sister that died, and that they sort of mistreated her, sort of just had the usual sibling stuff with her, where it was like, you know, she's the youngest, she's a girl, we don't really want to include her kind of thing. So you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense why they've got this little ghost haunting them. But then, after all this kind of sinister build-up of like, oh, they're haunted by this creepy little spirit and stuff, the conclusion to the story, which I did enjoy, but did not fit the sinister tone that I was, again, expecting from the title of this book. They basically play a game of ball with this invisible sister, and then she's like, thank you for playing with me, and goes to bed. And the father ends with this line that's like, oh yeah, I forgot we always had to make up after our fights before she would go to sleep. And that's all they had to do this whole time, is she's been haunting them because they're in a fight. And as soon as they, clear up that fight, she's like, I can go and rest peacefully forever now. It's like, mildly anticlimactic ending, but good story overall. I liked the build up to it. Again, there were some very spooky, sinister elements. You're wondering, ooh, what's going on, when you're still trying to figure out the haunting stuff. That was all very good, but it didn't play out to the sinister part that I was expecting. Definitely a bit mystifying, and overall I do, again, like how the story ended, but I wouldn't have put it in this collection based on that ending. So, yeah. Yeah, actually, apparently there were two that were guys with C's in them. I don't remember which was which, so my notes about A Sea Above the Sky might actually be for The Sea Sky by Helen Cresswell. Oh well. We also had Texts by Ursula K. Le Guin, where someone discovers his ability to read texts and things like crochet and the waves of the sand on the beach. Very cool concept. I felt the story was too short to really be a story and to have anything that could count as sinister in that aspect. But I loved the concept, and I wish it had been expanded and more like a full short story, because it was like maybe a page and a half. And I was just like getting into the concept and being like, yeah, I can buy this concept, and then it ended. And I was like, okay, I guess that's that. But yeah, and then we had The Adventure of the Sussex Vampire by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which is probably the first home story that I've ever finished. It was quite good. I enjoyed it a lot. I liked the twist on how they made the vampire work, and yeah, it was probably the longest short story in here, at least that I got through. There was also a King Arthur one that was just in a writing style that I was like, nope, I can't get through this. It's not jiving with my brain. But yeah, the Sussex Vampire one was quite good. Rather like the Agatha Christie one, where it's got kind of a twist to it to fit like a real world thing, but yeah, it was a fun read, and I enjoyed it, and I might actually try to get into some true Sherlock Holmes stuff after this, because I did enjoy it, and I think it'd be fun to see how others of his stories play out. And then the final one in here was The Bewitched Jacket, where basically this person gets a jacket from this fancy tailor who doesn't ask for a cost, and he finds out that he can steal money through the pocket of his jacket. You know, he finds like livre, I think, because it was Italian, and he like takes all this money out of the pocket because it just keeps replenishing, and then there'll be like these big bank robberies and things that happen after he does it. and eventually he gets his comeuppance for it and loses all his money and stuff after he destroys the jacket because he's like, this is too evil, I can't do this anymore. Although that he got to that point at all, he was kind of a morally corrupt character. Anyways. But yeah, it was an intriguing concept. I liked it. That one definitely had a sinister tone to it because he never got charged for the jacket. So even after he burned it, he still got this panic of, oh no, that tailor's going to come at some time. And I basically made a deal with the devil and this is going to be the end of me. So that one was good. It definitely had a very sinister ending. And so yeah, probably in a lot of ways the most sinister of the stories that I read in here. Yeah, so that was some highlights from Mystifying Sinister Stories of the Unexplained. Overall, I did enjoy the stories in it. Again, I feel like the subheading was a bit of a misnomer because a lot of them didn't feel very sinister to me. And I mean, I don't read that many spooky books, so I don't think I have that high of a tolerance for it. I think it was just a mislabeled book. But I did enjoy it, and the short stories were fun, and there were several in here that I was like, ooh, I'm glad that I found these. And like The Pelican by Anne Paling, I really want to try to find more of her stuff now because I liked that one so much. It actually read a lot like a Diana Wynne Jones to me, so I was like, ooh, another writer who writes like her. I could dig it. So I kind of want to go look for more Anne Paling stuff after this. But yeah, I think that's all I've got to say about this book. But I hope you guys enjoyed kind of my little review of a bunch of different short stories and didn't get too sick of me complaining it wasn't sinister the whole time. But yeah, I think that's all I've got for now. So this is the Uma Herper signing out.